Ooh, that's
Oh,
fancy.
that's new or
That
something.
was
Okay.
fancy.
See, I
Wow.
was gonna
Great.
say, I was like, that's what I'm used to, is the whole like, are you okay with being recorded in like all of my meetings at work? So you
Ah,
have to be like, yes, I am okay.
are you in HR?
No,
Oh,
I am working systems actually. So I
ah,
do software development and engineering, and I work in cybersecurity right now. So
very fun.
yeah, but we do a lot of like town halls and learn before lunches where people like present whatever they've been coding and stuff. So we have lots of recorded meetings.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we'll get things started and people will start trickling in as they always do. Um, so tonight we've got Monica. And for those joining us on Facebook, welcome as well. You're more than welcome to come on to Zoom. But I think we have more and more people kind of just watching our live feed on Facebook, which we're currently live. So we're good. But anyways, if you're new to the show tonight, if you've been with us before, please give us a subscription on YouTube and give us a like on Facebook, help support the show. That would be fantastic. Oh, apparently I look a little, hold on here, just real quick.
Look good.
There we go. How's that? I don't know. Anyways, okay. So Monica, welcome.
Thanks.
How are you?
I'm good. Look,
Great.
I even once again got out of bed for you guys.
Oh,
So amazing.
I feel so privileged. So
like staying up late for you.
right.
It's so sad. Like that 9 o'clock is like getting late. That's really depressing. Okay.
Right.
Anyway.
I hear you.
That's awesome. Well, tonight's going to be a great show because we get to know you a little bit more. Terry knows you really well. You guys are pretty good friends, but I don't know you nearly as well. I mean, I know you a little bit just from prior Marco Polo groups and things like that, but that's about it. And you know how active I am on Marco Polo, not at all. So, there's kind of that. But we get to know you and then discuss some kind of more serious issues about how to grow up in kind of like some toxic atmospheres and then not have that affect you going into your other marriages or into your other relationships. I think anytime you go to counseling, a lot of the counselors will tell you kind of the stuff that happens to you growing up. You take all of that with you and it kind of just builds and you take that into your other relationships, whether you want to or not. That's just sort of how we're geared as people. So, but you have a pretty amazing story. And so you definitely are going to have some good insights for us on this.
Thanks.
I think. Yeah.
I hope so. I hope it's helpful. Yeah.
Great. Well, the interesting thing is Terry knows you really well. And so I'm going to rely on Terry quite a bit. I know. I'm going to rely on Terry quite a bit to help us fill in some of this stuff because, sometimes people get in the hot seat and they're just a little bit like, well, I don't want to like talk about myself too much. I'm sure Terry can let me fill in some details here, how amazing Monica is. So great. Well, Monica, so I know you live in Chicago right now, and we started before, but tell us again, what do you do for work? Tell us a little bit about your job, how you got into that, all that good stuff.
Okay. Yeah, it was very random. My job kind of fell into my lap a little bit. So nice. I live in Chicago. I've been in Chicago for 15 years, almost 16 years now. So It'll be 16 years in the fall. And I came here with my ex-husband for me to go to school. So I came to get a master's degree in the humanities, which is a 1-year master's. And it was kind of a test run to see if I could handle the PhD program that I wanted to do, which I wanted to study ancient Mesopotamian languages and history and religion and culture. And I had no background in it.
That's amazing.
Totally. Also a random story of how I got into that, but I applied at the University of Chicago with no prior experience in it. It was kind of like something that I'd been a TA in a Civ course as an undergrad. And every time we covered the Mesopotamian stuff, I was like, that sounds really cool. I want to do that. And then it actually turned out to be really way better than I thought it would be even. So that was really fun. But so I applied with like no prior experience. I came out here and like met all of the professors in advance just to convince them to like let me into the program. And they did. They let me into this 1-year master's program. And they were like, we'll see how you do. And after the first quarter, they were like, we want you to apply. We want you to stay for the PhD program. So I came here to get a PhD, basically. I've been here ever since. And I'm finally going to finish my PhD this next year, which is like really exciting.
Nice.
Yeah. So my job, one of my peers in the program actually got a job at McMaster-Carr, which is an industrial supply company, working in systems because they host almost all of their own systems and maintain their own systems. They host their own website and everything. So he started working there and he was like, Monica, you should come work with me. Begged me for 3 years to come work with them. And I kind of finally got to the point where I wasn't really getting the kinds of teaching jobs that I wanted to sustain me as a parent, and my kid was getting older, which costs more money. And so I was like, okay, like he was like, they're sending in resumes. He said, send me your resume and I'll forward it. I was like, all right, I'll do that. So I sent him my resume and went through a couple interviews, and then they offered me a job. And so I've been doing it ever since. And they basically are a company that sometimes they hire experienced people, but they hire a lot of people based on like capability rather than skill, because they're like, we believe anybody can learn to code. So it's more about finding those people who like, you know, are smart, intelligent, who are generalists, who can kind of see things from a lot of different angles, who are really flexible in the department. So like maybe for 1 year you'll be doing mainframe coding, but then maybe the next year you're working on infrastructure, or maybe the next year you're working on front end design. And so they train you on the job, which is pretty incredible. But I really love it. I wouldn't have thought that I would like coding. I think I had a lot of misconceptions about it, but it's like super creative. It hits all my nerdy academic buttons. So I've liked it. It's been really good.
What language do you code in?
So right now I'm doing infrastructure, and I'm not like actively coding, but once in a while I use Python and PowerShell and Golang. We use a lot of Golang in our Terraform when we provision servers. But most of my coding has actually been in COBOL, which I'm like, they're not teaching anymore. So basically I am hireable for life. So, because like
awesome.
every like banks, anything that relies on transactions has a mainframe. And I don't really think the mainframe is going away. It does a really good job with what it's designed to do. So I'm like, well, there you go. They're going to need people who do what I do, I guess, for a while yet. So
now what happens once you get your PhD? Are you going to continue doing what you do, or are you going to start looking for like a professor position? Or
I might start looking for an academic position. There are a lot of things to weigh, because I don't want, like, one of the reasons I took this job too is I was like, well, I don't want to get into the postdoc circle, because I don't want to be moving like every year with my kid. He doesn't do very well with change. He has a lot of like anxiety, and he's very much a homebody and an introvert. And so he struggles with like new schools, new places. So I was like, I try to keep things fairly consistent for him. So it's like, I don't want to be moving like every year to a different postdoc and getting paid like significantly less than I'm getting paid now, right? That's another thing. But so I don't really know. And then my job has like some really great benefits that are, I think, really kind of keep me pretty loyal. I mean, I love the company and I love the people I work with, but like they have like a scholarship for dependents in college. Like if I work for them for 5 years, which will be like right when Hunter's starting college, then they'll pay like his college for like up to 5 years, like $21,000 or something.
Wait, pay his college or pay like your, okay. I was thinking like
pay
your
for
old,
his college.
like your student loans or something.
No, they'll pay for his college. And they also pay for education for employees. So I could go get like my MBA or whatever, and they would pay for it. It's pretty awesome.
On degrees.
Great.
Yeah.
That's great. So are you thinking about getting another one once you get through? Because I'm kind of that way too. Like I love just going to school. Like it's just something you can do. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I want a little bit of a break from it. But I'm not sure. I really love what my degree is in, and I love the research of it. So like there's also part of me that's like, well, maybe I'll like research on the side still and like publish and try to kind of stay a little bit engaged in the field, but I don't know. We'll see. So
nice.
It's a lot of,
I mean, that
my life is a lot like that, of just like, I have no idea what's coming up. Oh, this came along. Sure. Let's go do that.
Right.
So.
It kind of goes back to that old saying, everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten, right? You get your degree and you're like, what's your degree in? Like nothing completely what I'm doing at all, completely side topic, but yeah, you still have it. We'll call you.
I have it. Yeah. And it's super useful. Like I'm a big like proponent of higher education because I think that there are just ways that it stretches your mind and allows you to see the world in different ways. That's really, really valuable. I mean, I remember one time being in church and there was one of the other board members was kind of talking, as they often do, like when people start to talk about like learning and people want to be like, well, like the gospel learning is really important. Like if you're reading out of the best books, and I kind of made the comment of like, yeah, I think that's true, but I think that all learning is good. And if you're finding things that are true and beneficial, like that's also what God wants us to learn, right?
Mhm.
And I was like, I actually feel like, because I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, if you get a PhD, that must like really like challenge your faith or, and I was like, actually, I think getting a PhD for me made me like more compassionate. It helped me develop more Christ-like qualities, like especially studying the humanities, because like you learn all of these things of like what it means to be human and how humans are actually pretty similar, right, across time. And so it was just, I felt like I had greater like empathy and that it just made me more Christ-like, right? And then it was funny because then I said that in church and there was this one woman behind me that was like, I think that speaks more to Monica's character than to education. And I was like, I don't think so. Like, I think anybody who approaches it with that attitude of like growth and staying close to God, like, I think there's going to be blessings in it for you that really change who you are and last a lifetime. So,
Yeah. I would say that as far as getting an education, sorry, just making sure everybody's camera's turned off. So if you come in, please make sure your camera's turned off and your microphone's turned off so we can kind of keep everything orderly. I keep seeing everybody's video popping up here. So yeah, I mean, I would say the big thing that I've noticed being in education and like having gone through like higher education, the pride starts to set in. So that can be something that, I mean, because like the scriptures say, right? Because they are learned, they think they are wise. So it's just something you got to like keep in check. Like, are you using it truly to become humble and learn and grow closer to Heavenly Father? Are you learning to say, look how smart I am, and now I'm like above these guys and everything else? That hierarchical kind of mentality tends to set in all too often, unfortunately. So that's the one thing I would say, caution, beware. But yeah, other
well,
than
and sadly, like, sorry,
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
but I was gonna say, I think sadly, like, at least in my experience, I think a lot of that comes from insecurity, which is kind of seems, I think, counterintuitive, but so many of the professors I worked with who were not fun to work with and who I felt just were like not great people and I mean and who seemed kind of the most prideful a lot of the times, like really deep down they were just the most insecure. Like they were constantly worried about like what people thought of them, what people thought of their work, how something would reflect on them. um, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that they didn't feel secure in themselves, like about the work that they were doing. And so I think that was really eye-opening to me. I think about pride too, just in general, is that I think a lot of times it comes from this like pride and what I call reverse pride, which is like, well, those snobs, like, you're like not kind of as educated, or you don't have as much money or whatever, that you can kind of have pride too, that like, well, they're the bad people. And I think a lot of that just comes from our own insecurities,
Yeah.
which is, unfortunate, but
I think pride kind of tends to do that just no matter what, like whether it's in your profession or just in your personal life. It's kind of a way of like masquerading pain or like deficiencies that we don't want others to know about.
yeah.
Heavenly Father gave us all plenty of deficiencies to work on down here during our time on this life. But some people think that running from them or just having like this ego over that will just sort of cover it up. Like, no, we're not supposed to cover it up. We're supposed to work on it.
Yeah.
Welcome to life. So
Yep.
anyway, so okay, you're working on your PhD, and now how many you have at least one son, it sounds like. How many kids total?
I have one son.
Just one son. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So
And how long you been on the single scene?
so I have been divorced. Wait, like what year is it? Okay. 2021. It'll be 10 years in July.
Okay.
So,
And how long were
and
you
we
married?
were we were married for 9 years. We were separated for like the last year and a half about
Okay.
of that. And then, yeah, we got divorced in 2011. So,
Is he still there in the Chicago area?
No, he actually, so he might be moving to Chicago for the first time ever, but I'm not sure about that. So he actually left Chicago as soon as we decided to separate or to get divorced, and went back to Colorado to live near his family.
Okay.
And he was in Colorado, and it's funny because his job is still in Chicago, so he's been working remotely since then. But then his company opened an office overseas, and so he's been overseas for like the last 3 years, helping them open that office, and then he's coming back. So he's still not quite sure if he's going to move to Colorado, if he's going to try to move to Chicago. It's still kind of a little bit up in the air.
Is he close with your son?
They talk regularly. Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things that's really hard. Like, I think they're close in their own way, right? Like, my son adores his dad, which is great. And I worked really hard when he was little to keep that relationship going and to make sure that he was talking to his dad regularly, because that's important. I think that, all kids want their parents to like be involved, and they want to know their parents. And so yeah, anyway, so it was really important to me that like he have a relationship with him. And so he talked, and then he ended up getting remarried when my son was about 5, I think. And then he got a lot better. And I don't know what the impetus of that was, but I was really glad. He started talking to him weekly. So they usually talk weekly, sometimes a little bit more than once a week, but definitely every Sunday they talk on Skype or Discord or whatever, play video games together. So
Gotcha. So as far as your husband moving away as soon as you guys separated, was he not kind of active in your son's upbringing during that time? Or I mean, I'm here in Portland, and I think like I can't move because I can't leave my kids,
yeah, I think it's a hard thing. I mean, he had a lot of, I think, really difficult feelings and just stuff that he himself had to work through. And so I think at first I was kind of like, well, how can you do this? Like, how can you leave your kid? Like, I kind of had this view of like, how can he leave his kid? And but the more I kind of, dealt with it and talked to him, I mean, I just kind of realized like, I don't even know how to explain it. Like, he just had things he needed to work on, and he really hated Chicago. That was something that I think he had a lot of like negative associations with it. Now that he's been overseas, it's been interesting because he's like, oh, I realized, like, I learned that when you live in a city, if you just are willing to take advantage of what the city offers, you can really love the city. But like, if you're not doing that, you're not gonna love it. Right. And so I think he's grown a lot too in the time that he's been away. But like, he wants to have a relationship with his kid. I think part of it just comes from, again, like a lot of problems that we have, right? Like insecurities and doubts and worries. And even when like Hunter was a baby, he would say things to me like, I'm not cut out to be a dad. I don't hold that against him. I think that that's just, unfortunately, it just comes from like his own pain and background and other stuff, so.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that you helped to buffer that with your son because like when my father left me, like I think my mom, my family, they were just mad and angry. And so it kind of flowed over into us kids to be feeling like, oh, he left us. And, that's like still scarring to me to this day. So I'm assuming with your positive attitude, you were able to kind of help smooth that transition so that maybe your son didn't feel like abandoned or left behind, despite, your ex's struggles that he was trying to work on.
Yeah, for sure. It, it was really important to me that he not think badly about his dad, that they have a good relationship. I mean, there are some consequences of just him being with me full time and seeing his dad only a couple times a year in person, in terms of relations that you just can't avoid, right? But I was always super positive. So I never talked about like, oh, well, when we decided this, like your dad moved away right away. Like I never really talked about any of that. I was always really excited when he would go see his dad. I was like, you're going to get to see your dad. It's going to be so much fun. I think in some ways he felt more abandoned when I would like leave him with his dad. So I remember one time think he was like 3, and I went to pick him up at the airport, and my ex-husband had like flown him back, and he saw me and he's just like, I hate you. And I was like, okay, like that's unfortunate, like, and I think it was like 3 days later or something, he came up and he was like, Mom, I didn't like you at the airport. And I was like, okay, well, do you want to talk about it? Like, you want to talk about your feelings? And he was like, well, you left me. And so we talked about like, that it's really important that his dad have his time with him just one-on-one. He's like, well, why can't you come with me? And I was like, because your dad needs to have that time with you. Like, it's about you being able to get to know him and him being able to get to know you and not have other stresses and stuff. I was like, it's for you. Like, this is a good thing. So we would have talks like that a lot when he was little, that I kind of realized after a while that it was odd and strange for him when he was super little to go see his dad, because he just didn't do that very often. And then he would be there for like a couple weeks, right? And I think kind of wonder like, is my mom ever coming back or something? Or if I am going home. But yeah, it was always important for me to have like a positive spin on everything. So for sure.
That's a huge benefit to kids. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, in the long run, it's about them, right? Like, it's not about whatever baggage we have in our relationship. Like, it should be about what's best for our kids. And sometimes the things that are best for our kids are things that are really difficult for us to do, but like, it's important. And it's important enough that they, feel loved, and that they don't feel the center of any conflict, and that they don't feel used in conflicts between parents. Like, I think that's really, really, really important.
Yep. So. Don't want them feeling like they're the pawns and all of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there is one thing, Monica, that you kind of left out that.
Oh no, what I leave?
Truth comes out. Here it comes.
See, this is where Terry's super handy tonight.
Right? I'm trying to just like I mean, I know this stuff, but there's just certain things that you kind of left out here. What about Iraq?
Oh, going to Iraq?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I spent 6 weeks in Iraqi Kurdistan in the summer of 2017 doing an archaeological dig. Yeah, that was fun. Hunter stayed with his dad for part of it, and then with my parents for the other part of it. What do you want to know about?
Why were you in Iraq?
There's like a lot of stuff.
That's kind of fun.
Like, yeah,
that's everybody's dream, is to go on and go dig up bones and things. I mean, so that's
was pretty amazing. Yeah. So I was on an archaeological dig. We were digging a site that's just south of Erbil. So Erbil is in the north. It's kind of the unofficial capital of Iraqi Kurdistan. So Iraqi Kurdistan's like northern Iraq. And so that's where we're at. We were about, 30 miles from Mosul. And it was the summer that they finally took back Mosul from ISIS. Like, they did that while we were there, which was kind of crazy. So like, one of our days off, Fridays were always our days off, because that's the religious day of the week in Islam. And one time we went, and they like the Kurdish military like escorted us onto one of the sites that the university that I was at, so the University of Chicago, had dug like 80 years ago. And they had to take us on because it had been mined. So like, there were mines all over the site, and so they had to like escort us through. But that was like super cool. But we could like see Mosul from where we were, and it was definitely like that part of the trip was the most where I was like, oh, this is a war zone. Like, everything else was kind of really normal and fun, and the people were phenomenal. Like, I really loved it. Like, I would love to go back. It was funny because I have some friends who are in the military, and who like, some of them do like contracting work with the military, and they were like, you guys didn't have any security while you were, and it was like, no, like, we didn't even lock our front door unless it was night. Like, it was just like, we were just there. I was like, don't tell my parents, because they would probably freak out. They'd be like, I didn't tell my dad until after I was back, because he would
yeah, that would have been scary.
Probably like flipped. But yeah, it was really, really, really fun. Huh?
So what was the food like?
The food was amazing. So I can't eat gluten. I have celiac disease, so I can't eat gluten. So it was kind of sad because I couldn't have all the breads and stuff. But like, I think one of my favorite things to eat is dolma, which is like just stuffed vegetables. And we would have these giant plates of like stuffed everything from eggplant to whatever. And that was like our favorite day. And we'd start with this massive platter. And at the end of our meal, it would be like empty, like everybody just would have eaten. That was like one of my favorite things to eat, but it was really good food.
Was this stuff with like meat or something, or like other vegetables?
Yeah, with meat and with rice and
okay, good.
Yeah, it was really good. And then what were some of my other favorite things to eat? Oh, so I have not been able to find these in the States, but like pistachio Magnum bars they sold at the store. They were so good. So if anybody finds pistachio Magnum bars in the States, let me know. I will be your friend forever. They're so good.
What are they?
So Magnum bars are like the dipped chocolate, like vanilla on a stick, right? Those are Magnum bars. And here they have like almond flavor and all sorts. They don't have pistachio, and the pistachio ones are so good.
Like an ice cream or something?
Yeah, it's ice cream. It's like pistachio ice cream that's dipped in chocolate on a stick.
All right.
It's really, really good.
So you didn't feel nervous at all being over there? Kind of like, all right, well, like we could come back like a head shorter or something like that. It's been known to happen, you know?
Yeah, no, I really didn't feel nervous. Like, the people were lovely. I think part of it too is just, I guess I don't feel the use in feeling nervous all the time. I mean, sure, there were some like anxious things once in a while, and traveling as like a woman in particular in Iraq can be fascinating, for lack of a better word. There were definitely people, like there's still a professor out there who like will send me like Facebook messages of flowers and like pictures of he's like, this is my village. And I just am like, dude, I'm not going to marry you. Like, and one guy who like was asking me, hey, can we take a trip to Greece together? And I was like, no, we cannot, but thanks. Like, also you're already married. I know you guys do polygamy over there, but that's not really my jam. So, it's just like.
So for all the single girls out there who are thinking there's no hope of getting married, here's your hope right here.
Hey,
just go to Iraq,
the Middle East.
There'll be guys all over you. Yeah.
There you go. So that was an interesting experience, but I wasn't ever really nervous. I mean, there definitely were times where they would kind of look out for me because I was the dig registrar. So I actually had an office in like an annex to the museum that they called it an annex, but it was just an unfinished cinder block building with like no windows, no floors, no nothing. And so I would work there all day, like cataloging everything we'd found and taking pictures. And they always were like, we want to make sure that we always have somebody we know there with you. We don't want to leave you there by yourself all day. Like, that's a little sketch. And I was like, okay. I mean, I'm just kind of like, whatever. Terry knows this. She's traveled with me. And there are plenty of times where I'm like, yeah, why not go do this thing that looks sketchy? I don't know.
Yes, I will. Yes, I will vouch to that. I get nervous very often, but she actually made me nervous last time.
Oh, sorry. My bad. Once in a while. And Terry's like, no. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. I'm like, if he has a machine gun strapped around him, I'm pretty sure I cannot enter.
What?
Weird. Like when we were in Kenya a couple of summers ago, like the police people had like their big old guns strapped around their bodies walking around the street. And I'm like, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's kind of nuts. So it was weird too, because in Erbil in particular, it's like locals or like oil, like people who are there working for the oil industry or like contractors. That was it. So you'd find these like enclaves of like expats who were just like, working for the oil industry or whatever. And I probably just totally I never wear mascara and I did it just for you guys. And now I rubbed my eye.
No,
So
you're looking good. You're good.
Anyway, so that was also kind of fascinating and you could always tell who everybody was. I was like, oh yeah, there's the contractors, there's so-and-so. It was funny. I actually dated a guy for a little bit who we met on Bumble. And this was totally a joke. We were like sitting around one night. We wonder if Bumble works in the Middle East. Let's pull it up and see. And sure enough, and I met this guy who was in Baghdad at the time as a contractor and like lives in Colorado. Anyway, it was like ridiculous.
That is so funny.
Yeah, it's funny. But yeah, it was fun. It was a good trip.
Did you see any camel spiders when you were over there?
I did not, no, but I apparently at the site, and I went out like a couple of days, but I wasn't out at the site very much. but they ran into pretty much like every poisonous thing that you can find in some corner of the site. Like one day they were like sending me pictures of a snake that they found and like was in a bucket, and they're like, this will kill ya. And then they had like the yellow scorpions, and then they had a spider that they found. I was like, you guys are just having a blast out there, aren't ya? And there was one day where so there was apparently a skirmish between brothers who were working for us. Because it's very like, unfortunately still very colonial, I feel like, in the way that a lot of these things are done. So we have a lot of like local villagers who are working for us as excavators. And there were these two brothers who were fighting over which type of like who got to use the pickaxe and who had to use the broom. And they both wanted to use the pickaxe. And like one of them went home and like got his shotgun and like came out to the site and was like, anyway, there's a little bit of de-escalation that had to happen there. And then we were like, you can't come back. Sorry. No weapons on site. Like,
Oh my God.
That must have been a joy when they were growing up for their mom to like, all right, guys, put down the guns, no more knives when you guys fight. Okay?
Right.
Share your
it's kind of crazy. And we were also digging on a site that had been used as an artillery like site during the Iran-Iraq war. So there were like, they'd come through and cleaned out most of it, but once in a while we would find like munitions, and we'd have to be like, call somebody in to clear out, the munitions. Yeah, make sure we're not blowing ourselves up.
Right.
So
crazy. Oh.
Well, awesome. That sounds like a huge adventure. I would love to go over there. I would just kind of be a little nervous to hang out in Iraq for any length of time.
It would be
5 seconds.
It would be fun. And I saw Steve like say, did you see them find a mine in your area in the chat? I was like, not in my area. There was one point when we were on this site where the military had to escort us that like I stepped like 2 feet to the left to take a picture, and one of the soldiers was like, no. And I was like, oh, I'll stay over here then. I definitely do not want to go. So
oh my gosh.
Yeah. Wow.
Would like to stay in one piece if possible.
I actually knew someone, or I do know someone who went over there for contract work, and he was in one of Saddam's palaces, roaming around and doing something in there. I don't know exactly what, architecture or something. And he came across this framed picture painting, and it was Joseph in his multicolored robe being thrown down the well with his brothers. Now, I guess he was saying it was really random that was there because they don't like Christian art or anything Christian in that area. So it was really weird that it was up in Saddam's palace, right? So he was asking one of the military people, was like, wow, what's that about? And the guy's like, I don't know. And he goes, and the military guy's like, do you want it? And he's like, can I have it? And like, we all know that the guy on post probably had no right to give away that painting, but the individual, he gave it to the individual, rolled it up and sent it home. So now he has a Saddam painting in his house. So weird.
Wow.
That's so crazy.
Random, yeah. Of Joseph being thrown down the well.
That's probably worth something.
It's also very like common in times of war that like soldiers just take. So this happened in like World War II all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually like taught a class at the University of Chicago called Who Owns the Past? And it was all about the expropriation of cultural heritage and property. And we did whole sections talking about like war looting of various property. And we compared like there was one time that I showed like a clip of the new Mummy movie. It's a horrible movie. Don't watch it. But yeah, because the beginning is so fascinating because they have these two soldiers who are like in all this Arab garb on horseback. Like it's almost very like trying to be Lawrence of Arabia or something in the beginning, right? But they're riding into this site to loot it, like to steal, right? And so we talked about how like that is actually like a very, in terms of like modern, some of the stuff that was going on, like this is very common where like people are taking stuff that like doesn't belong to them because they're the victors, right?
And the guy's like, I asked, and the guy told me I could take it. The guy with the gun told me, yeah, you can have that. And I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's so nuts. So, but yeah, a lot of stuff was taken during World War II too, in the same way, and then recovered. And like, I mean, there's a whole thing with the Nazis and
yeah.
Hitler's art campaign, which is just insane. But Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
War is just kind of chaos. Anything goes, everything goes, whatever.
Yeah,
It's unfortunate. So
it's really sad. So
yeah. Well, so fantastic. You've had some of these major adventures, obviously going to Iraq, working on your PhD. Fantastic. That's amazing.
thanks.
How have you found time during all of this to kind of be a part of the single scene, or have you much over in Chicago?
Yeah, I have off and on for sure. I mean, I think it's just like one of those things where you just have to make time to do it, right? I definitely have had moments where I tended for a long time, I'm getting better at this, for a long time to be a very generous dater. What I mean by that, like sometimes I was a little bit too kind. Like I would be like, okay, well, I'll give them like a second chance or a
If they have
third
a
chance.
pulse, you'll go out with them, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
not quite as bad as that maybe, but like just where I would kind of go out with somebody and be like, this is off or not quite a good match for me, but then just be like, maybe it was just an off day. We'll give it another try. And I very quickly learned that like that just was, I got to the point where eventually I was just like, I don't have the time. Like if I'm taking time away, especially if I'm taking time away from my kid, right? Then it has to be time, like even if it doesn't go anywhere, it has to be time well spent in some way, right?
Right.
So I started to get a little bit better. Like I had friends who were like, why didn't you just leave in the middle of that date? And I was like, I don't know, this is a person and I don't want to be mean to a person, you know, like just very, but then I kind of realized later, it's probably for the best. Like,
so tell me about like, obviously it sounds like you've been on some bad dates, but like what kind of date would you leave in the middle of that was like so bad? Were they just like, okay, this person is a jerk, and so I'm going to use the restroom and never come back to the thing?
Sometimes it could be like a jerk thing, but sometimes it would be just like weird stuff, right? Like I remember going out with a guy once and we sit down at this little cafe and he pulls up his laptop and he was like, I just wanted to go through all of my answers on OkCupid so you could understand me a little bit better. And I was like, okay. And I don't know if you've been on OkCupid, but like some of the questions they ask are a little bit like out there. Anyway, but it was like everything. It was like we got to one question and he was like, I should bring this up on LDS podcast. He was like, so landscaping down there. He's like, you could do whatever you want. And I'm like, you're talking to me about pubic hair on a first date. Like it was like stuff like that where I'm like, I sat through the whole thing. And I think that was
that's
one
not
where like,
appropriate. Let me just write that down.
where it's like, dang it, that was gonna be my next go-to. So it's like things like that where I think it just would have been better for me to say, this is not like this isn't gonna work, right? Like thanks for your time, but yeah, so sometimes it's just weird stuff like that, or like when people just drop like all the bombs on the first date. I feel like that's
when they just
really
dump their whole life story on you or something, like
yeah, like the whole, and it's not that it's, I mean, we all have stuff, right? Like we all have stuff that eventually if we're getting close to somebody, we're going to want to share and talk about, and there are things that people should know about our past to understand us, and that's normal. But I feel like on a first date, like it's not the time to be like, oh, and by the way, like I'm on probation and I can't afford anything. And yeah, I accidentally like killed a woman when I fell asleep at the wheel of my car and was charged with manslaughter. And this is a real date I'm describing.
wow.
Like one guy,
Oh
right?
Maybe
Like
we should just switch the topic tonight about Monica's dating adventure. Holy cow. Jeez.
So it's just one of those things where it was just like all of this stuff I think can be really overwhelming for people, right? Where you don't actually feel like you're getting to know them, but then you have all of this stuff kind of thrown at you and it feels like, whoa, like I don't even know where to start with with this or with you. Like
you got to ease into that stuff just a little bit.
Yeah, you might want to ease into the manslaughter description. Just a little. Yeah. I mean, and there's also, I think there's also like ways in which people, like if you're trying to tell them you're not interested, how they respond is like, I don't ghost people because I just don't, I believe that it's just better to say like, hey, I really appreciate your time. Like I'm not interested, but thanks. And I think sometimes the way people respond tells a lot about them. Like if you're trying to set a boundary, then sometimes that would be like, if people weren't respecting that boundary, then that would be kind of my signal of like, okay, I've told you now I'm not going to respond.
So how do you set a boundary around that? Like, okay, I just want to let you know, I normally don't date people that have been convicted of manslaughter. So it's kind of a boundary of mine, just a thing, you know.
I actually like don't even think it has to be specific. I mean, I think with him in particular, I did tell him that I was a little bit overwhelmed. And I was like, I just am not, I'm not sure kind of like how to kind of deal with this and get to know you in an organic way. Like I feel like it's kind of colored. And I was like, and that's not fair, necessarily fair, but
Right.
it just was a lot. I felt overwhelmed. And I was like, but I really wish you the best, you know. And he kept texting me for a while. He would not give up. But that the very last text was like, you've missed the best time of your life. And I was like,
Boys,
I don't think that's true, but thank
you're
you.
missing out.
Well, you may
Yeah.
have missed one of the most interesting, like weird story dates of your life, but you know,
That could be true for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. So it's I mean, I think that people appreciate honesty more than, and that can be hard. I think sometimes too people will be like, oh, I don't want to hurt someone. And I was like, well, is it that you don't want to hurt them, or that you don't want to be stuck with feeling the discomfort of having hurt them and hearing their response to it? And I think sometimes it can be both, right? Like if you tell someone you're not interested and they like lash out at you, like is it that kind of makes you uncomfortable, or is it actually the kind of like, I have to let you down, you know?
yeah.
It's hard. Dating's hard. Poor people.
Yeah.
Oh, so it doesn't sound like you've had much success kind of there in the Chicago area. Or have you done a lot of long distance dating too? I mean, is this kind of all over?
I've done some long distance dating for sure. And I've had some really good experiences, and I've had some really bad experiences, and I've had some experiences. Like I think it's kind of all over the board. There was one guy I dated for a while who was really just a really good guy. He was not a member of the church. He was a really good guy, really respectful. It was long distance most of the time. He lived in Chicago, but he was gone a lot because he was a military contractor. So he was like in and out of town a lot. And anyway, but it didn't work out. But he was a good guy.
That's good. Now, how did you guys meet? Do you meet most people online or on Marco Polo, or because you're fairly active in the Marco Polo groups, right?
Yeah, once I discovered what it was, yeah, I was like, this feels like a nice, safe, slightly more organic way to meet people than dating sites. So yeah, before that, it was kind of almost always online. I definitely like, I'll go to singles activities here, but we have a really small, like mid singles group. There are a lot more mid singles in Chicago than participate in kind of the mid singles stuff.
I feel like that's kind of everywhere though. Like people
Yeah.
just sort of like they're on the record somewhere, but they've gone inactive or just something's going on. They just don't want to be a part of it. Or they show up to some activity and they're like, okay, this was lame and I don't want to come back.
Yeah. I think that happens a lot, sadly. And then I think a lot of it too is like, so we have a mid singles branch here, but because like you can't take your kids, a lot of people have kids. And so those of us who have kids, like you couldn't be a member of the branch. You also like couldn't really attend regularly unless you like weren't with your kids that week or whatever. And so for me, that's like I could go like twice a year, right? To the
Wow.
branch.
Yeah.
And all of the activities kind of get linked to the branch. And so that kind of like complicates it, I think. So
That's weird that they won't let you bring your kids to a mid-single adult. Usually they have like, they might do a magnet ward where there's like a ward set up with, you know, everything else. And if you want to transfer your records in there, so it's a normal ward / mid-singles ward or something,
yeah.
but maybe they just didn't have the infrastructure to support primary and nursery for those who might need it and all that kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah, they did have like a magnet ward for a little while, and then they just decided to go with the like, no, we need a separate branch.
Oh, wow.
But it's been kind of, and I think it's been good for some of the people in that branch for sure. Like I think it's been a huge blessing for them, but for me, it's just not quite a good fit a lot of the time, you know. So
I feel like it's a hard thing for the church to kind of figure out because they're like, okay, well, if we have a magnet ward, then it's almost like you have 2 wards in one. So if you're the bishop, you're like, okay, I got all these singles over here with all these needs, but then I have the regular needs of the ward, and it sort of throws off the balance a little bit. But then if you have a regular ward that's just completely singles, then you have situations like we were talking about, you know, how do you have primary and everything when there's like 3 kids in primary or something?
yeah.
So there's
For
not a
sure.
real easy answer, I don't think, on that one.
Well, I think a huge part of the problem is that singles are undervalued in the church. And I feel like most single adults, like if they felt like they were making a contribution that was meaningful to their congregation, I think that they would like being in regular wards, right? But I think that's not the case. I think a lot of times they're kind of overlooked and not put to use. And that's a shame because I'm like, some of these people's talents and skills, like there's experience and other things there that we're not getting from anyone else, right?
It's just the culture, right? I feel like if people feel like they can't support and even like put people who are single in certain callings because then maybe they're supporting divorce or supporting broken families or whatever, and
Yeah.
that's just not the case. I mean, as we know,
Yeah,
this last conference, there are more singles than married currently as
yeah,
adults in the church. So it's not the case, but in
Also,
culture, they
yeah, and I
can't
think
support
also they just, yeah, and I think also they just can't relate to singles because it is such a family oriented, organization that it's really hard for people to relate to a single mom or a single dad and kind of know where they are supposed to fit in. So I think that's kind of a struggle that hopefully is being, the awareness is being brought a little bit
yeah,
better in that
Yeah, I think
regard.
they kind of look like you're broken,
yeah,
they kind of pity, maybe even.
yeah. Or sometimes they just aren't aware. Like there's just not, like some people just haven't gained kind of that level of empathy, right? Of kind of under, like I remember I was in the Relief Society presidency when I was getting divorced. And like I remember being in a meeting where we were talking about like somebody from the presidency needed to attend a missionary correlation meeting, right? And the Relief Society president was like, well, I can't, like I have this schedule conflict. And then the first counselor was like, well, I can't because my husband isn't home. And like I have, it's the kids' nap time. So Monica needs to do it. And I was like, well, I have a 2-year-old like who needs to go home and take a nap. But it didn't even click, right? Like there was this part of me that was like, well, I don't have a husband.
Yeah.
Like, kind of like, but it was just, and it wasn't like she was being malicious or anything. It just didn't even occur to her, I think, like in her mind of like, oh yeah, like, or maybe she thought, well, one kid is easier than 3. Whereas I think the best solution would have been like, hey, we need to tell them that this isn't a good time that will work for any of us. Like we're not in a position to do this. And I remember one time I had a calling as an institute instructor. And for a long time, it was during the day. So I would like ride the train downtown over lunchtime. And that was fine because at that point, my son was in daycare. But then they switched it to night. And so I was having to find a babysitter like once a week to watch my son so I could go teach institute. And eventually I just like talked to them. I was like, this isn't like for my life circumstances, like this isn't feasible anymore. Like I can't be finding like sometimes I struggle to find a sitter. I was like, I shouldn't be having to find a babysitter to fulfill my church calling. And they were like, oh yeah, that's totally fair. Like and released me.
Right.
But I think sometimes they're just not thinking right about it. They definitely have gotten a lot better here, which I don't know if that's just because I get in their face and I'm like, dudes, like, do you know how many like single parents you have in this congregation? Like, but they're getting better. They're getting better on here. I think too, like, wasn't it Elder Christofferson who talked about like diversity and how, you know, the diversity in the church is there to help us grow. That like we're supposed to have, it's not supposed to be that like people come in and all be the same. Like that diversity is like vitally important to us becoming more like God, and not because we're changing people, right? But because we're giving people space to worship God in the ways that they can, right? Within the church, and that there's flexibility there. And I think that flexibility is growing in the church as it becomes more worldwide, but it for a long time I think it was pretty inflexible. And so it's nice to see it changing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I sort of feel like in the church, there is, I mean, going back to what you're saying, I mean, you're right, the diversity, you don't paint a picture with just one color, right? Like you have to have a multitude of colors to make it a really, truly great mosaic. But at the same time in the church, I feel like there's kind of a program, and the program's kind of been going this way. And it's like if the program's going one way, that like there are people that are kind of going off a little bit. Like maybe 40 years ago, it was great, like families and everything else focus on that. And the singles, we kind of figure out what's going on. But we're talking now about a demographic that is more than 50% of the church membership.
I mean, that's huge.
That's huge.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My feeling has always been we've got basically young men's like general leadership, we've got young women's, we've got Relief Society, everything. Everybody has like a general leadership council, but the church doesn't have anything like that for singles. Why can't there be like a general singles like church leadership?
There should
Like,
be.
I
I
believe
think
there should be. You've got 50%, more than 50% of your entire membership, and then you guys are still trying to figure out what to do with them. Like, I feel like the
Yeah.
church is kind of like back here in time, and then like society is sort of happening up here.
Yeah.
So if the church, and this isn't to knock the church, so don't get me wrong, I'm not here like bashing like they suck and blah blah blah. It's just that,
I'm just kidding.
right.
We know, Everett.
I just feel like there's so much here that needs to be done. And like I sat in a singles leadership or a singles committee meeting today, right? And it's like they just don't know what to do. They're like, well, I feel like we need to have something. What was this little thing that they did? It's called like the abundant life. Like, guys, it's okay to have like an abundant life being single. Like, freaking thanks, guys. I got it. Like, my life is so busy because I am single and raising kids sometimes and doing this.
Yeah.
And like, I've got a more than abundant life. That's not my problem. Maybe some people, that's the problem. I need to know how to fit in with this church program.
Yeah.
That's where I need to know how to go.
And I think like we see this a lot too in like firesides, right? For singles adults and stuff, where I don't know how many I've gone to where I'm like, wow, this is so condescending. Like, I feel like they're approaching us as a group of humans who are 15, as opposed to whatever
They
age
are.
we are. Like, and sometimes I brought it up. I'm like, guys, like, ask some different questions. Like, we're adults here. Like, we have a lot of experience. Like, don't treat us like we're teenagers. It's very infantilizing.
You don't
Right?
want them just to hand out for the Strength of Youth pamphlets and call it good? I mean, I don't get that. Why not?
Yeah, like, here you go.
Here you go.
Go live an
All this.
abundant life, right?
Have fun.
Yeah.
Well,
And
the
so
problem is exactly like you guys were saying, the people that are in charge or organizing it are those people who are in leadership who have no idea how this goes or how this feels. They can't relate. They don't know what to do. That's why, it's just my opinion, the church needs to have a general singles like committee of some sort, like general singles leadership group. And it can be men and women, right? That's just, this is here to help us establish a strong program.
I volunteer, Everett.
Nope.
And the problem is,
I'm out.
Volunteer.
I'm out.
You just write a
Nope.
letter. You'd be like, you could put me on that council. I volunteer for that calling.
Cool.
Yeah.
I volunteer all three of you, and I'll sit back and watch.
No, yeah, I don't live in Salt Lake. I'm good. So I'm all right.
I know, like here, like attending some of the singles activities. In fact, this experience alone probably made me branch out and organize more single events in the last 2 years than I probably ever anticipated on organizing. Went to this, it was like a Thanksgiving dinner thing. And I see both sides. I see the problems with it. You have to try to please all different age groups. But the problem is that the ward, unfortunately, it was my ward, was responsible for the entertainment part of it. And I kept trying to tell them, look, we don't want cloggers. We don't want a talent show with your kids on the stage singing or things like that for the first 40 minutes. We don't need that. We just need a social hour. And if it ends in a dance, it ends in a dance. It was the most horrific entertainment I think I've ever experienced in my entire lifetime.
What'd they settle on?
Well, they did a ballet show, a clogging show, and a horrible entertainment of somebody screeching in the microphone for about 30 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm watching people leave, and I'm thinking, what the heck? What just happened? And I went to the ladies and I said, would you want to sit through this? And they're like, no, that's why we're doing the dishes. Well,
Right.
There's a reason why we don't want to attend these events, because, you know, you treat us like we're 12 or 10 or, you know,
Yeah.
so that's when
Yeah, exactly.
breaking away and just doing my own events, because I was just like, no, I can have some fun. And no
Yeah, for sure.
I
vlogging.
does anybody else get the feeling like when they put these things together, it's kind of almost like they're reluctant to do it, kind of like, okay, let's do some sort of formula that we think might work because that's what we did like back in like the singles days of our youth 40 years ago.
As if
And
they
let's just
even
get this
remember
over
those
with.
days, right? Like
Right.
as if they even remember it accurately.
Yeah. It's almost like let's just get this over with and then move on. Like, okay, good. We got that off the plate. We'll check that box. Now we can go back to doing what we do. That's how
Yeah.
I feel with a lot of the singles programs. And I don't think, it's because people are mean or bad. They just don't know what to do. And
Yeah.
the hard thing is you lose so many people in the church to being single because they feel like there's nothing for them. And when there is quote unquote something for them, like, well, we gave them a fireside or we did a little dance or like some little clogging event or something. Like, what? Like, do you think that's going to bring people back? Like, there has to be, people need to be fed, right? Like President Hinckley's 3 things that every member needs. Like, I feel like as a single person, I don't get that.
Yeah.
I don't feel that way in the church. I feel like in my ward, I'm the ward pariah, basically. They're like, oh, go just take your calling and go do your thing. And they sort of tuck me away and like, okay, don't worry about it. So
I
So
feel like
awful.
sometimes too, and it's so weird because I'm very, very secure in going to church by myself. I mean, I've done it for a majority of my life. My ex really didn't attend church. He did maybe for the first year and then he just kind of cut out. I feel like now that I switched wards in January though, I don't know. It's just really odd. I feel like I have this, sign on my back that just is like in neon lights. It says single, because it's my daughter and I, and I'm just like, oh, and it doesn't bother me. It's just sitting there in sacrament. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
know?
Well, and there are like all sorts of other things that go along with it too, right? Like I remember going on dates with people, like this one guy told me, he was like, "Oh, I think that all women who work are selfish." And he was like, "I mean, of course not." I'm like, "Who are you talking to?" Like, and then he's like, "Well, you have to." And I was like, "Yeah, but what if I didn't have to? Like, what if I chose to, right? Like, what if this is something that I actually
That
feel
is just selfish.
impressed to
Selfish.
do, right?" Yeah, like I'm so selfish. So I think there were a lot of times like growing up in the church. I mean, I grew up in this teeny tiny little branch. So I didn't feel like I was exposed to church culture really until I was like later in high school and in college. And then I was like, what is this? Like, what are these things? I don't understand what's happening. And it was hard because even before I was married, I already felt like a pariah because I wanted to get, advanced education. I wanted to work. I felt like God had a plan for me that included my skills and gifts being in the world outside of mother. And that didn't mean that I didn't care about motherhood or want to be a good mother or feel like if my future kids would be my priority, but like that was hard. So I already felt that way. And then that played, I think, like an interesting role in my marriage because it was something that my ex really liked about me when we got married. But then like as it went on, he kind of felt more and more like, oh, and I think part of it was like him defending this to his family, but felt more and more like, oh, well, we're not fulfilling the roles that we're supposed to be fulfilling. And maybe that's a problem. And me being like, why is that a problem? Like, why can't we follow our own revelation? So I feel like a lot, and then I got divorced, right? So then I had that pride, but it's just like, I feel like it's just been like a long period of my life where I have not felt like I have a place, right? Within kind of Mormon culture for sure. I mean, not that I necessarily want to be
I was going
in
to
the
say, do
culture
you really
side of
want a
things.
place in the culture though? Because
No.
that's like, so it's interesting because I was asked one time to give a presentation to the young women about being an adoptive mother. And they had this little panel, so they had different mothers that were going to, share information or whatever. And one of the young women had asked It was about becoming a mother. Anything mother related was fair game to talk about. And one of the young women, like, literally got teary eyed and all choked up. And she's like, I want to go to college. She goes, I want to be a doctor or whatever it was. And she's like, and is that okay? Like, she just felt so heavy hearted and so sad because that was her desire. And she felt like it was almost sinful. So I
Yeah.
gave my supportive spiel, and the lady next to me like chimes in and is like, well, actually, honey, you probably need to prepare to be in the home until all your kids are out of high school, and totally gives her this like guilt trip. And I'm just sitting there, and the girl literally broke into tears.
Oh, it just like makes my blood boil
I'm like, that is
hearing that.
the standard is taught to stay in the home as if you can with small children. That lady over there teaching this or trying to tell this young woman that she had to be there till all of her kids were out of high school. I felt like
Yeah.
reaching over and choking her, but I didn't.
Yeah. Well, and even though with small children, like, so this comes from a talk that like President Benson gave, right? About like if mothers can, like they should stay home with their kids. And the interesting thing to me about that talk is I was like, but like his mother was a working mother. Like his dad was on missions for like most of his childhood. And she was basically a single mother, like running the farm, right? Like,
Yeah.
so there's a part of me that's like, I think sometimes when leaders give counsel or give kind of their, like, we don't take the context of where they're coming from, where I'm like, she was with her kids because they had a farm to run and they ran the farm, like they worked with her on the farm, like, which is a very different thing from like, you know, just staying home. And I think too, there's a way in which like, I don't know, we're not very good as a society in general of giving people the space to make different choices
To have their
and
own
to
voice.
celebrate and honor those choices,
Right.
right? That like, it is great to stay home with your kids and to give them your time and to make a nice, like, that's wonderful. It's great to like put your talents to use in the communities and the cities and states where you live. Like, all of those things are good things, right? And that's not just a church thing. I mean, that's, I think, like a wider cultural problem, right? That's especially hard on women because it really feels like a lot of times women can't ever win, right?
I agree. I totally agree.
So going back just real quick to the kind of just the church in general not knowing what to do with this. Somebody had sent me a survey, and I'm going to post a link to it in the audience. It's basically for the churches trying to put together some new programs, and they're looking for people who are single that want to basically put some thoughts into this, and they're trying to get as much information as they can to figure out how best to work this. And I believe this is in, I want to say it's in Orange County over in California. So if you get a chance, I'll post a link right now in the chat. And just if you're in the audience and get a chance to do the survey, please take the survey. This will be something you can click on it and just kind of finish it whenever. But this is something that may help with some of these programs that we've been talking about. So sorry, I didn't mean to kind of divert from what you guys were discussing there, but I just wanted to make sure I got that out.
Oh, it's
No,
fine.
that's
I mean,
fine. Yeah.
it kind of reminds me, so like of some of the stuff you're saying earlier, Everett, where it reminded me of a really good talk that one of my former bishops gave that I really liked, and it was kind of when like big tent Mormonism was becoming a big thing. And he gave this really, really good talk where he talked about, he's like, we want people to be in the tent. Like, we actually do want a big tent. We want people to feel at home under this tent. He's like, the problem is that we tend to decide who we want in the tent and then move the tent, right? Like to one side or the other, rather than actually becoming more inclusive. And I like that kind of idea of like, it's not about shifting the tent, right? That it really is about kind of creating more space where people's gifts can be valuable to those around them and where they can feel like they're making a difference and where they can be challenged and grow. And I think sometimes we focus a little bit too much on like individual, living of the gospel and kind of individual salvation. I'm like, there's a reason that like God has us worship as imperfect people in a group.
Yeah.
And like, it is because we are supposed to like challenge each other to grow and think about the ways we do things and rethink about them and seek revelation for our congregations. And like, we're supposed to be involved in this active worship as a group that has a different way of like changing us than our family life does, right? Or our individual worship does. Like, it's a different thing, but it's so important.
Well, if everybody's like-minded, like there's no growth available, right? Because you're all just sitting
Exactly.
around being like, yeah, we all agree.
Yeah.
But if you're at different levels, you're either helping someone up or someone's helping you up, right? And
Yeah.
so that actually, I gained a huge testimony of wards and how the Lord kind of puts you in a ward when I moved out of Utah for the first time. And I realized that some other churches, you kind of go around and see where you fit in.
Or what you like, right?
You
I really like that preacher.
I didn't like the pastor, so I'm going to go somewhere else. And I'm not bashing anyone's faith on that, but I just realized there's a lot of wisdom in sticking you in a group and you make that work.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, you can have some challenging wards or you can have a ward you're thriving in, but no matter what, you're going to either be growing or helping someone else grow, hopefully, if you do it the right way. So
yeah, for sure. I really like to think of it like as so, you know, the scriptures about charity, right? And it says charity seeketh not her own, which I think a lot of people read and rightly read as like charity is not selfish. But I also like to think of it as like, as people, we're inclined to gravitate towards people who are like us, right? Who are like similarly minded, like have similar backgrounds, whatever. And to me, that charity seeketh not her own is about like not going after just people who are like you, right? Like looking for the gifts and beauty and things that you can learn from people who are very different from you, and like seeing their divinity and their beauty and building those friendships and learning and growing together. Like,
yeah.
and that's one of the things I love about church, because I don't think I would have like, I don't know, I wouldn't have had the same experiences of getting to know different types of people and being able to like care for people in the same ways, like in really personal ways, without like ministering or other, you know, programs that we have. So I don't know, like that a lot.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay,
Monica.
whoop.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes.
And I'm not going to tell you who told me to ask you this, but I
Oh.
am supposed to ask you about doing the chicken.
Doing the chicken. It was Terry, wasn't it?
Yes.
No,
I do not give
why
away.
do I get blamed?
I don't give away sources. I'm just asking you to explain doing the chicken.
Chicken. Do you want me to explain it or do you want me to do it?
Explain it, because I have no, first explain it, then do it, because I have no idea what you guys are talking about.
No explanation.
Don't listen to Everett. You cannot explain this. You have to experience it.
Oh, do the chicken.
Do the chicken.
Is this a dance?
Now, no. Now I feel really on the spot. I have to hold on. Got to get myself in chicken mode. Okay.
Keep in mind, this is going to be recorded, so do your best.
Yeah, right.
It's not like I have not like thrown this out there in Marco Polo land.
It's okay. Yeah, I think that Terry probably has this saved on like some Marco Polo video of me doing the chicken is saved somewhere. I'm sure. Okay.
All right.
Do you want me to keep going?
That's awesome.
I just now all of a sudden want chicken fajitas.
Apparently, people say I do a good job of sounding like a chicken. I don't know.
It's awesome. Yeah.
The weird thing is, how did people ever find out you have this talent? Like, were you just sitting there on Marco Polo one day and decided to bust out in your chicken or something?
Okay, so should I tell them the story about this, Monica?
I don't even remember. You can tell it, Terry, because I do not remember how this came up.
So she was on Marco Polo and they're talking about like noises or something that they do. Okay, mind you, it's like 4 o'clock in the morning, and I get on Marco Polo and I'm just catching up, and I get to hers and she does this chicken, and Kinley, my white lab, bolts off my bed and just creates all this ruckus in my room trying to find this chicken.
I do remember that now that you said that. Yeah. And she was like, "What are you doing?" And then she said that was really impressive on double speed. I was like, "Oh, I'm sure it was."
That's the best, is when you have it on double speed.
Yeah.
Nice.
I fooled the dog, so that's a win.
That's awesome. Hey, if you're fooling a dog, that's a pretty good chicken.
Right? My goodness.
Great. Well, Monica, so, growing up in the church, and getting to where we're at now. Obviously, once we get to the singles program or get to this phase of life, we've gone through some challenges, whether it's we've never found somebody, we've been married and divorced or whatever. But I think your journey here may have kind of a little bit of a different flavor than most. Like, it sounds like you had some struggles growing up that may have kind of just made it an extra difficult path. And I love to see the fact that you're like totally positive and everything about this. So I want to know how you, well, first tell us your story, and then I want to know like how you compartmentalize the baggage and the pain and the hurts and things you've been through to get to where you're at now. But first, tell us your story. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves here.
Well, I'm an expert compartmentalizer. Okay.
Oh, all right.
Yeah,
They
it's
teach you
actually
that
something.
in your PhD program, right?
Oh no, I'm actually like, I think my dad taught me that is probably where I learned that from, but it's also something I'm working on in therapy. Okay. So,
Right.
I mean, it's funny because compartmentalization, like just because you brought it up, it's one of those things that I think really helps people be very resilient, but like you can't compartmentalize forever. Like you have to be able to deal with those feelings and to grieve things properly and to heal, right?
When
Like you
people just
can't
stick it in a compartment and never touch it, like they just
yeah, if
leave
you
it there.
stick it in a compartment, never touch, it's gonna come out at some point,
Yep.
right? Like
Yep.
at some point that'll be like the last straw kind of, and
Mhm.
and something will come out in ways that you don't want it to, right? So you have to deal with those feelings, but compartmentalizing can actually be like a very good tool for resilience as like a short term, right?
Mhm.
So my background, so I was born and raised in Colorado.
Go
We
Broncos.
huh?
Go Broncos. Sorry.
Yeah, go Broncos.
Yeah.
So I actually wore orange. I was like,
I was
I'll
gonna
wear
say,
orange
like,
just for
orange
Everett,
shirt.
so he can be like Broncos support. Okay.
It's awesome.
And like we lived in Oklahoma City near my grandparents lived in Oklahoma City on my mom's side. And so we lived there until I was like, we moved out of Colorado when I was a baby and lived there until I was like 5. And then we moved back to Colorado to this little town in the mountains where I lived until I was a sophomore in high school. And then we moved to a different town in Colorado where I went to Fort Collins, where I went to high school and college. I have 4 siblings. I have one, my brother actually just passed away in March, at the end of March. So
Sorry.
yeah, it's a tough anyway. And part of this, like I think actually goes back to our childhood. I think some of the struggles that we had. So I'm the youngest of 5, and it goes girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. And all the girls are about like 5 years apart. The boys are about 5 years apart. But my parents were baptized when my oldest 2 siblings, my oldest sister and brother, were small. I think my oldest sister was maybe like 5 or so. Um, and so I was born in the church, raised in the church, but like she remembers kind of not, like she remembers kind of being little and just learning about it for the first time, and going to the temple to be sealed with my parents and stuff like that. She remembers. So, but the thing was, is like both of my parents came from really difficult backgrounds, really difficult backgrounds. And so my dad was physically abused a lot as a kid. He was the son of a Nazarene preacher, and like everyone in his family. So his brother is a Nazarene preacher. His brother-in-law is a Nazarene preacher. His grandpa was a Nazarene preacher. It's a lot of Nazarene, and like a lot of my cousins are ordained Nazarene, and so it's a lot of that on his side of the family. And so to convert to the LDS church was a big no. It was a big deal. I mean, I think my dad did not tell his parents that they were being baptized, and they found out and they drove like overnight from Iowa to Colorado to see my dad and to tell my parents how wrong they were. And they told them, they were like, we're praying that something is going to happen to one of your children, that God will take one of your children from you so that you understand like what a grave mistake you've made.
Wow, your grandpa
joining
sounds
the
like a
church.
gem. That's
Yeah.
brutal.
I mean, it's pretty brutal, and it's hard because I don't know, I just have this very like holistic view, I think, of people, and I'm like, yeah, they did these horrible things, and at the same time I know that it's just like generations of trauma going back, right, that led them to this place. So that's my dad's family, and he was significantly younger. Like he was kind of a mistake, so he would always say like, I was a mistake. My mom said I was a blessing, but she wore overcoats to hide that she was pregnant until like the month I was born. And he was born in June in Iowa. So, you know, those, I know, like, I think Eric's on here. He can attest to June in Iowa as being very warm. And my mom's parents were also Nazarene. They weren't like as against it, but it came out kind of more as they got older, especially with my grandpa as they got older. But she was abused by her brother as a little girl. And so both of my parents had just this background that was really hard. And they brought that in to their parenting, you know. So I grew up, my dad was super physically abusive to us, and my mom was super emotionally abusive. So my mom has borderline personality disorder, a really, really extreme case of it. And that was hard. And I think like we didn't have the tools to kind of understand like what was going on with her. Like we just knew how we felt most of the time, which was pretty crappy. But we didn't know kind of why she was the way she was, or, you know, why she was doing the things that she was doing. There were times where I remember kind of having realizations of like, oh, this type of thing doesn't happen in other people's families, or oh, this type of thing isn't okay. My dad, on the other hand, like so there was a moment when I think my brother, who's just older than me, was probably like 9 or 10, I think. And he's always been the most outspoken one. Like he's the one who will be like, you suck, you're doing this, you know, like he'll stand up for himself. Let me put it that way. And I was never like that. I was always very much like a people pleaser. I just wanted people to be happy. I wanted people to not fight. Like I was very much kind of, let's just try to keep the peace all the time, which is a lot of burden, right, to carry as a little kid in your family. So my dad was spanking him with a belt, and my brother looked up at him and he was just like, you're abusing me. And my dad said, like, he shared this story with all of us as adults. And he said that you know, at first his instinctual reaction was kind of like in his head thinking like, oh, I'll show you abuse, you know. And then he said he just looked at the belt in his hand and just realized that my brother was right. And he never hit us with a belt after that.
Wow.
There were still plenty of times where he would lose his temper and kind of, but I think from that moment on, he just made a commitment that he was going to treat his children differently, that he was going to do his best to change his behaviors. And he really didn't know any other way to parent, right? Like with what he came from and with what he was dealing with my mom at the time, with none of us really understood. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't make it okay. But like he's like now, like I would never have to worry about him like doing anything physical like to my kid, right? Like he would never do that. So it's been kind of inspiring to see his growth and like see him change over time. But it still doesn't change the fact that like we all had to deal with, you know, a dad who hit us and a mom who neglected us. Like it's just kind of rough. So
when you say physically abusive, now are you talking that he spanked you a lot, or like would he actually like punch you type things? Like describe, because physical abuse can be like, if your brother's saying you're abusing me because I'm being spanked, some people might say, well, that's, you know, not something they would consider abuse. But
yeah, I mean, I like personally, I think because of my childhood, like I have a strict like no spanking policy at all. Mm-hmm. But you know, I think there's a difference maybe between getting spanked once in a while and like, you know, being spanked with a belt. I mean, like he would leave welts, right, on us. And I remember like hearing a story from one of my older sisters once, that there was like one time that my dad hit one of my older sisters so hard that like she had a handprint on her face and like couldn't go to school. And so there were things like that. There was one time in high school where he like grabbed me and kind of threw me across the room. And so it was abuse, right? Like it wasn't okay. And I think sometimes it's hard too, because people will think of spanking, or they think of like, oh, you know, they were getting spanked, but like I think it's hard to define like at what point does the spanking become abusive. And I think and I don't judge people who spank, right? I think for me personally, like growing up with the feelings that I had about it and the ways in which we were all so scared of my dad, like I just made a commitment that I would never hit my kids, like ever. And I remember
always like rage type of thing. Was it just Was he like extremely angry like all the time, or
Oh
just
yeah.
okay?
Yeah, I had a really, really hard time controlling his temper. And I think that part of that was kind of where he came from. And then I think that was just exacerbated by his relationship with my mom, because she was so like, I don't know how many of you have ever had a relationship with a borderline person, a person who has borderline personality disorder, but it is really, really difficult. And I mean, just in terms of, and then not knowing like what's going, like how to fix it, right? Like he was
Right.
constantly just being told how awful he was and how he was always failing and, you know, all of this stuff. But like, there was nothing any of us could have done to make my mom happy. There's still nothing that we can do to make her happy, right? It's just the way that people with borderline deal with their emotions and their pain is that they kind of like vomit their pain on everyone else around them, right? And kind of blame them for all the pain in their lives and aren't willing to take accountability. And that was really hard for my dad. So I think there probably would have been some of that regardless of my mom, but I definitely believe that his relationship with her exacerbated his anger and his temper. Um, yeah, so I remember times specifically where if he thought that, like if my mom was angry and he thought that we were at fault, right, then sometimes he would take it out on us, right, as opposed to like saying, huh, maybe there's something wrong here. But it's like he didn't have the tools either, right? Like none of us had the tools to know what we were dealing with. So um yeah, but then with my mom, it was always so like subtle and underhanded, and you kind of never really could put your finger, especially as like a kid, like put your finger on what was wrong with the relationship. um but you knew that it wasn't right. Like I used to just tell people like, well, I have a really difficult relationship with my mom, like it's really stressed. um I think I got a little bit of more clarity when I was in high school, because when we moved to Fort Collins, my mom stayed behind in Vail where we had been living, and worked during the week there, and then drove up and stayed with us on the weekends. And she would always blame my dad for this. She'd be like, "Oh, he made me do it." Da, da, da. And I was like, "Well, why?" And she would say this even when I was in high school. I was like, "Well, why? Like, he's not going to make you do, like get a job here. It's fine. You could change it." But I started to notice that like when she was gone, at the time, it was just my brother and I and my dad at home. And like, we would have such a different experience. Like, we were happy. We were able to be spontaneous. We enjoyed spending time together. And she would come home on the weekends and everything would just go out the window. Like, she was angry all the time, which made all of us irritable. So there started to be this way in which I was like, oh, well, when mom's around, life kind of sucks. Right. Which is,
Yeah.
but then you feel bad. Like, I felt bad about that because I was like, well, I love my mom. And I want to help her. And so, but it was just really hard to do, and it was hard for me to kind of understand the ways in which I was being pulled into inappropriate behavior. Like I was parenting her a lot, right, as opposed to the other way around. So yeah, so it was tough, and and it contributed to a lot of problems in my family. Like my brother Jared, who died in March, like started drinking fairly early. I think on like maybe end of middle school, or yeah, I think end of middle school. Um, and had to fight alcoholism and addiction like his whole life. He had tons of anger too from like just experiencing what he did as a kid with my dad. Like he had a lot of resentment and a lot of anger, and it spilled out into his relationships and his relationships with his kids, and he left a lot of mess right in his wake. So I think, I don't know. And like I have an older sister who's now also been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which is very common when you have a parent who suffers
Yeah.
from it. um and it's hard to kind of, she's working on it and she's like going to therapy and she's doing all of these things, but it's like, I don't know, it's just hard to see this person who I know has so much love and empathy and kindness, like also be kind of cruel and not see the ways in which her behavior affects her kids or those around her. It's tough. It's really tough. And like, I mean, borderline takes like years of therapy to get over it. And when my mom was diagnosed, like she will deny it to like, my parents got divorced finally a couple of years ago. My dad tried to leave my mom in college and I was the only one who was at home. And that was rough because she would like come to my apartment and just like sit on the couch for hours waiting for me to get home. And then she would constantly attack me for like, well, if I'm not on her side, I'm on his side. And it was really, there was a lot of rough stuff. But that was like kind of the moment when I really realized like, wow, there's really something wrong with my mom. And but he finally did. And so he came back because he didn't know how to deal with it. And then he finally left her 3 years ago and got divorced. And it's been rough, but we've all kind of I mean, tried to support her, but she just won't. She doesn't accept the diagnosis. She doesn't accept, she just lives in her own reality. Like, and that's true of a lot of people who have borderline. Like she just lives in completely her own reality, like enough so that my siblings and I will like have to check in with each other or with friends who we knew were present at certain things and be like, did that really happen? Like, is that reality? And we have to have other people like validate it to us. We're like, yeah, that really happened, because we've just been gaslit like our whole lives, right? Where my mom would be like, that's not what happened. You remember it wrong. You know, it's hard to have someone who has so much kind of knowledge about and say in your own history to like not be able to trust them, right? To not be able to trust that they see reality clearly is, I think, tough.
Yeah.
So,
Well, yeah, that'd be absolutely difficult and challenging, especially as a kid, because kids have a hard time processing that type of stuff anyway.
yeah.
So yeah, that's got to be super tough. So then how did you manage, what was the steps you took to where you now, as being a mother, you've decided to kind of let go of the difficulties of your past, take what was good from your parents and add to it to move forward for your kids? What was your process with that?
So I think my biggest process was like, I just had a lot of things that I couldn't quite put my finger on, but sorry, my dog just opened the door and came in, so I've got to shut the door again. But like I said, there were some things that were direct, right? Where I was just like, I'm never going to hit my kids. Like, I don't ever want my kids to be scared of me. I also had like a very strict, like, I was like, I do not want to be with someone who is going to hit their kids. Like, because I just have such strong feelings about it. So that was a big one. With other things, like I just had this sense, and I constantly was kind of, I don't know, trying to be self-aware of like, is this really what's happening or just feel this way? But I just felt for a long time like I don't feel like my parents. I mean, sometimes my dad does take responsibility for things that he does, but it's like I don't feel like my mom ever takes responsibility. Like I just had this view of like I don't think she's ever apologized to me for things that have hurt me. And so I kind of having that feeling, I was like, I want to be really transparent with my kids. And I want to make sure that when I screw up, that I'm taking accountability and that I'm apologizing to them, that I'm really straightforward about being human and having weaknesses, and that they understand that I know that I'm not perfect. I don't expect them to be perfect, and that I model what that looks like for them, like what apologizing and restitution and remorse and repentance like looks like for my kids. I felt like that was really really important. And I think real like recently with everything that's going on with my mom, I realized that like she has never once apologized to me sincerely in my entire life ever, like never once taken responsibility for
Isn't that kind
anything
of a
she's done.
borderline thing though? Like borderlines
Hmm.
usually don't, it's not their fault sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
And getting them to start on some sort of therapy. I mean, you mentioned your sister's working on it.
Yeah,
I think it's
like
kind of rare, you know?
it is. Yeah, it's super rare. And my sister's you know, in therapy and she's trying her best, but it's hard. It takes years of therapy if the person who has borderline is willing to like accept their diagnosis and work on it, which because it is such a strong indicator of borderline that they're usually not, like most of them aren't, right? So I think like on the diagnosis sheet, it said BPD and my mom wrote above it like blood pressure disorder or something, like from the
Oh
psych
my
hospital that
gosh.
she'd been in. And it was like, no. She's like, I have a blood pressure thing. And it's like, okay. Like, but it's also hard for me because at the core of it, like I recognize that she's just deeply wounded. Like it's hard to feel so powerless in the face of these people who you love, who are just deeply, deeply wounded. And like, you can't do anything. Like you can't do anything to make it better for them. That's really, really, really hard. I mean, it's especially hard for someone like me that like likes helping people and wants people to feel loved. And but it just, there's nothing you can do, and that's really kind of tragic. So
It's almost like you had a double dose from both parents. You had the abuse and you had a borderline mom who just made life miserable, and probably,
yeah,
I would imagine, still does to some degree or another when she's around. Um,
yeah,
yeah. So, the fact that you kind of were able to grow up and like recognize those things and then stay away from those things, and not carry that over into your own marriage and your own relationships with your son, I think that's huge. That shows a lot of kind of internal cognitive dissonance and cognitive ability to think things through, to say, all right, this is not going to be me. I'm going to separate
yeah. Well,
what
thanks.
happened to this. So,
I mean, to an extent, like I didn't and I did, right, with my marriage. So I think with my son, I was able to kind of separate out and be like, I'm not going to be that type of parent. Like these are two really concrete things I feel like I can hold on to and say I'm going to do this differently. But it's really, really difficult. I mean, I got married when I was 21, or 23, sorry, 23 after my mission. And it's hard when you're that young and you come out of that kind of dysfunction to not have something that like comes up in your marriage, right? So in like for me, I just had no model of what love looked like or what love should look like in a family, right? So I remember I dated this guy for a while in high school on and off, and he was just a lovely, lovely man, like really kind, really loyal. And it just felt so foreign to me that I was uncomfortable with it. Like I felt like there must be something like up his sleeve. There was something like no one could really love me that much. So there must be something going on, right? Like something like it just, and I would tell people that it was all about attraction. I would be like, I just am not attracted to him. And it wasn't until after I was divorced from my first marriage that I was like, well, my only marriage so far, that I realized like, oh, I I was not familiar with love. Like he really cared for me in a very kind of unconditional way. And it was overwhelming to me because I just hadn't experienced anything like that. And it didn't feel authentic because of what I'd grown up with, right? So in some ways, like I ended up marrying someone where I felt like I had to earn love a little bit more, right? Where there were still, and my ex-husband was not as bad as my parents, obviously, but there were some times like when I was in therapy where people were like, "So you kind of married your mom?" And I'd be like, "No, I did not." Kind of like, but I think what I recognized eventually was like, oh, like there are some things where I can see like, oh, I feel like I have to like earn his love, right, in this relationship. And like if he withholds it from me, I deserve it because I messed up. Or I was willing in my marriage to take on blame, right, for things that weren't my responsibility because I was so used to that. Like that's what I did as a child constantly, was like took on all the blame for stuff that was kind of my mom's stuff or other things that were going on. And then um yeah, so I didn't quite like evade all of that. I mean, I don't know if any of us can, right? But that was a huge contributor to like the breakdown of my marriage too, was the fact that like it felt familiar. And I don't know how to describe that other than that, is like um it felt comfortable, right? Like it felt like I knew what to expect. And that felt safer to me than something that was actually healthier. And I think that happens to a lot of people, right? Um, and
we go
so,
to what we know, right?
yeah, we go to what we know. I mean, I remember like even so, my son was a baby, and I don't even remember what saying, but my ex said something to me, and I remember just thinking, like, oh, I don't want my son growing up thinking that this is how he should talk to his wife. But like even then I didn't come from it at it from a point of view of like he shouldn't talk to me this way, right? Like I
Mhm.
had to have this mediation of like what I wanted my child to experience and learn and what type of person I hoped he would be, um, to kind of recognize the ways in which my marriage wasn't healthy. And so that was hard. Like and I've done lots of work since then, right? To like learn to set boundaries and learn, which is really hard when you've come from a family that's full of borderline people. So,
Yeah,
um,
I think you know what it is. People who can come out of family situations like that and are able to kind of see beyond the reality that's given to you as a child, be able to see like this is just not right, like something's not right here. I almost have to think that because some personality types don't see it, they just continue on with it, they carry on with whatever it is, and they bring it into their next, their life and their family and their kids and marriage. And but there must be something about certain personality types that can recognize it. So it seemed like you recognized it, maybe not all of it, but you recognized things that needed to change, even as a child. Like, okay, I'm not going to do this. Whereas
yeah.
some kids would do the opposite. They would just assume, oh, if I got beat, then I beat my kids. So, I have this kind of, this is, Church by Celeste. I kind of have this theory that like sometimes the Lord puts like a strong, logical person that maybe they have a trait that's logic or whatever, and stick them in these kind of crazy families to kind of be that person to kind of start the path toward, you know, being
Breaking
healthy.
the cycle.
Yeah, like it just seems like like there's usually at least one kid that can kind of like push through it all, and then even kind of bring siblings or even bring their parents with them to kind of help everybody kind of get more on the right path versus just continuing the cycle. I don't know. That's kind of how I feel like. So I'm looking at you and I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, she's one of them. Like she's the logical one that the Lord stuck in that difficult situation to help be a beacon for the rest of your family. I don't know. That's kind of how
Oh,
I view
that's
it.
very kind. Yeah, I don't know, like that might be too generous.
No, I think it's true.
But
I think that being able to see beyond that when you were grown up in it, when you're
yeah,
raised in it, it's hard. So,
it is really hard. Yeah. And I think too, it takes a lot of work. Like, um, I think I have ways of thinking about it and talking about it now that I didn't have in the past, right? Like it was kind of like I knew something was off, but like I I didn't know exactly how to frame it or think about it. And now I feel like I have tools to be able
right.
to do that. But
You have terms and an
I have
understanding.
terms and an understanding. Yeah.
But
I
even
think,
then you knew something was off, right? You're like,
yeah.
something's not
Yeah.
right here.
Yeah. And there are times where I just like, I feel like sometimes I honestly just feel really lucky. Like there's a part of me that's like, well, I was the youngest. So I don't think I had quite the as worse of like the brunt of my dad's anger that my oldest siblings had. And then there's a part of me that's like, plus, like, in some ways, because my mom was gone during high school, which she all the time will be like, I should have been there for you. I wasn't there for you. And there's a part of me that's like, I'm glad you weren't there, which is also really hard to like say and think about because I feel like it would be hurtful, to her. But like, um, having that distance from her during that period was really, but like still having time with my dad and my brother was, I think, really shaped me a lot. Whereas like my other siblings, like one of my other older brother and the sister who's in the middle, like they both went to college early. And there's a part of me that's like, oh, I think
They're
I
like,
think they just needed to get out. They needed to get away from home. And then there are things that I realize now that I don't think I realized as a kid. Like I had a habit of getting off the bus at the wrong stop and like wandering around town or taking the wrong bus home. Like even when I was in kindergarten, like my mom would be waiting for the bus and I would not get off the bus and the bus driver would be like, oh, she got off like 5 stops ago. Like I could convince bus drivers to take me anywhere. Apparently I was very convincing as a child. And um, I think for a long time I framed that as like, oh, I didn't really, think of boundaries the same way. But I think I realized later as I was older, I was like, I really didn't want to go home. Like I liked having time by myself. I liked walking around by myself. I liked being able to have my own thoughts. And home was kind of like not a safe place to be. Like it was loud. Um, I have a lot of really extroverted siblings. It was hard. And so I think now I'm like, oh, well, clearly I was feeling that, but I didn't have the tools. Like it was just kind of framed as like, oh, Monica is this crazy kid who doesn't understand rules and we have to call the police all the time because she doesn't come home. Like, it was kind of it's been nice to kind of realize as an adult, like, no, there was like a logical reason for those feelings and what I was doing. And but yeah, I don't, in terms of like bringing family with me, I think the hardest thing for me has been to kind of let go of the feelings of like responsibility that I have to like make it better for people. And that's really hard, like really, really hard. Like with my mom, like I think she's really been bad since the divorce. I mean, really bad since the divorce. And she just kind of has gotten better now because she's dating somebody new. And so it's kind of, she has her new favorite person who's her knight in shining armor. And I was like, it's only a matter of time before this sweet, humble man gets the real her. I mean, it's almost painful to like listen to her because I can see that she's putting on a show almost, right? But she doesn't even realize it, that she's like faking it kind of. It's very strange. But I've been thinking like, do I need to cut off contact with her because there's no like, because she's not going to change, and there's ways in which the ongoing contact hurts me. So I have like those thoughts, right? I have thoughts of like my brother who you know, didn't make it, right? I mean, like he couldn't, he took his own life. And like a lot of that I think had to do with like our childhood, his addictions, like various choices that he'd made that had resulted in consequences that were difficult for him. Like it was, and like I saw him, I mean, he came to visit me at the end of February for my birthday, and it was so nice to like spend time with him, but it was also just that feeling again of like just being powerless in the face of extreme sadness. And so it's like, well, I don't you know, like
Yeah.
it, for me it's been hard to kind of let go of feeling responsible for everyone else, because I think that's how I felt growing up, was that it was my responsibility to like keep people happy and make sure that we weren't fighting, and make sure, I mean, obviously I also fought. I was not a perfect child by any means, right? But to kind of let go of that guilt of kind of where my siblings end up is hard. It's hard with my like middle sister because she's always been kind of my hero. And um and that relationship is really strained right now for a lot of different reasons. And so it's just, there's a lot of things about it that are tricky, you know, but I still love my family. I just wish I could do more for them. But I think most of the time we can't. Like we all have to, we kind of do our best to love people, and then they have to make their own choices, you know?
Yep.
Yeah.
Love them for who they are.
Yeah.
So did you ever notice, like when you were married before, or even just as a single mom, did you ever notice any of those traits creeping up and you're like, okay, wait, this is something like my mom would do. I've got to like back off, like let's take another run at this from a different angle.
Yeah, definitely. And like I think the interesting thing for me has been, and this has been really useful actually in therapy too, is like sometimes I'll just have to check in because I'll be like, I feel like I had this response or reaction, and I felt like, oh my gosh, am I borderline? Am I crazy? Like, am I like my mom? And
Right.
most of the time I feel like I'm kind of overly aware of that. And most of the time it's fine. Like the thing that I'm doing is it's a normal response to something. It's not at all like my parents, but it's like it's a fear though, right? That sometimes I'm like, wait, is this how I'm responding? Is this, and then someone will say, like somebody else will give me some feedback where it helps me realize like, oh no, that's not at all the case, right? One really clear example was, I remember, I think my son was maybe like 3 or 4, and I don't remember what he did, but he did something, and it was such a quick reaction, like where I just like swatted his bum, you know, and immediately I was like, no, like what am I doing? I'm just like my dad. And it was like not at all like my dad, but it was kind of, I just had to like stop and be like, okay, I think there's a way in which this is more about responding to my child in anger, even rather than like how I act physically about that. But it kind of just gave me some time to like self-reflect and be like, okay, I can't, like, he's a kid, he has no idea. Sometimes I would just say to myself, like I would give myself kind of things to say to like remind myself of like where kids are, which sometimes I also do with friends when their kids are being, you know, jerks, I'm like, well, like, consider this. Like, and I remember even sometimes telling my son, like, okay, you know, I get it. Like, your frontal lobe is not fully developed yet and you lack impulse control. Like, that's okay. We're still going to practice impulse
Yep.
control so that someday when it's developed, you have better impulse control. Like, it's
And
just
he was
like,
like 3 and he looks at you like, I have no idea what you just said. Like,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
what?
he's a little bit of an old soul.
Yeah.
Terry can tell you
Yeah.
he's pretty mature for his age, but he like, and I would have just really honest discussions with him. Like sometimes I would like react badly because it was in a bad mood, and I just would have to pull him aside and be like, dude, this is not like, yes, your behavior was inappropriate, but I am just stressed out and I'm responding to the stress more than to you. Like, I think it's just really important to be transparent. Like I was like, the only way that I can do this and feel okay about myself is if I'm like completely transparent with my child.
And I think that's a great example for them, because then they can realize, okay, mom is imperfect and mom admits when she's made a mistake, and it's okay, which
Yeah.
means it's okay for them to accept themselves as imperfect, and we all make mistakes and it's okay. Like, I think it creates a really good learning atmosphere for repentance and trying to do better and moving forward and all of those things. Whereas if you took the hard ground, like, I don't ever apologize, or I don't ever do
Yeah.
anything wrong, and mom's always right, like, that just is not a good atmosphere for kids to learn in. So
Yeah, for sure. And it also models vulnerability, right? Like
yeah,
it's really vulnerable to like sit down with your kid and be like, wow, I really screwed up and I treated you badly and I'm really sorry. And like let's think of ways to kind of like do this better next time, you know? And so I think it also teaches kids to be vulnerable, like with us. Like my son and I have a really good relationship where he talks to me about pretty much everything, and he feels safe. Like he knows that if he comes to me and talks to me, that like I'm not going to tell his friends, I'm not going to tell people, I'm not going to, I'm not going to make him feel bad about it. I'm not going to like tease him about it. Like he knows
right.
it's a safe place, and I think that was one of the things that like if I could have thought about some of like I thought about it kind of in these tangible things of like I'm going to do X and Y and Z, right? But I think in terms of like my parenting approach in general, like my goal was really just to make sure that like our home and our relationship was a safe place for my child. Um, and that's something that I feel like has succeeded. But then there's a part of me that's like I'm probably just lucky. I was just lucked out with a good kid, but like he definitely feels that way, and that's a good thing. So
Hey, if I would have stopped with my first kid, I would have been the best parent ever. I would have given myself like 25,000 awards. I've been like, look how good I am. But the Lord's like, okay, here's some more. And then I realized it was just her. She was just
yeah,
amazing.
yeah, I'm constantly just kind of like, I tell him all the time, I'm like, well, you're just a good, like people will tell me, they're like, oh, you're such a good mom. And I was like, well, he's also just a good kid. Like,
It's a good combo.
it's a good combo, but I definitely like, I love being a mom. So I've actually considered like adopting out of foster care and doing foster care, which I also think is kind of weird because I don't feel like there's really a space in the church for that either. But I'm like,
I love
these kids,
adoption.
yeah, I'm like, these kids are going to have a better, like a good shot with me, like a better environment than a lot of them will have in foster
Oh,
care.
absolutely.
And I'm like, I have the job and the resources to take care of kids. I was like, I have a lot of experience with trauma. So I feel like I have a lot of empathy for understanding like the vast majority of times when kids act out or do something, it's because of something they're experiencing or feeling or whatever, right? And being able to give kids space for that, like for healing. I don't know. I really love kids. I want to have more. And I was like, and I don't want to have to like wait to, find a good partner or to have to like, I don't know.
Well, you
He
For a
really
long
just wants
time
to,
I did, but
you don't
what?
gotta
he
be
really,
married to adopt.
he really just wants to steal McKenna. I already know that's the plan.
McKenna and Hunter, like they're tight now. They're good buds. McKenna's awesome. I love McKenna.
That's awesome. So, it's interesting, just listening to you talk and kind of going back and reiterating a little bit of what Celeste was saying, that I believe sometimes Heavenly Father has like a way of breaking that cycle, through generations of sending a stronger spirit in and saying, okay, we need someone who's going to be here. And, it's interesting because you look at your parents, right? So are they, by the way, are they still active?
They are. Yeah, they're
Okay.
still active.
So it's kind of funny sometimes, and this is just obviously, like Celeste said, this is the gospel according to Everett, but I see that in certain like leadership training meetings, I remember having like this discussion with some of the leaders that were there. And there was one that was broadcast from Salt Lake. And I've never forgot this, but they were talking about people who join the church and how to kind of get them to like stick, and people who get converted and then just sort of fall away, because that happens quite a bit. And their comment was, we sort of feel like the second generation of those who join the church become the ones who become the strong members, right? And I always thought, gosh, that almost sounds like you're writing off people once they get converted, right? They get baptized and like, well, yeah, well, let's focus on your kids a little bit and see how that goes. But if you're looking at your situation, right, and to me, it's entirely conceivable that Heavenly Father says, okay, we need to have some changes here. We need to kind of break some cycles. So your dad, for example, right, and your mom,
Mhm.
there's some things that aren't healthy here, but we can start by having them join the church. Because whether or not you realize that now, or we realize it later, that is a huge step. My parents were the same way. They joined actually when we were living in Chicago. And at the time, the nearest temple for us was Washington, D.C. So
Right.
that's where we made a trip over to go get sealed when I was really little. Um, but you get somebody who joins the church, that's a huge first step, right? Now
Yeah.
you get somebody else who's going to break some of these unhealthy cycles that have been going on. That's another step. So Heavenly Father's kind of incrementally doing this, like, second, third, fourth generation type thing, and kind of healing family generations. And then it becomes on us, to go and do family history and all those sort of things and kind of be that person that kind of helps clear out past mistakes and kind of get people sealed and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
my personal opinion on the matter, but I can certainly see the Lord's hand in things when you kind of take a bird's eye view.
Yeah, I definitely feel like, growing up, I always felt like my parents' conversion story was like such an anchor to my own testimony, especially given like what my dad was willing to sacrifice, like with his family. I mean, because I didn't know most of the members of my dad's family until I was in high school. Like he was very estranged from, um, I felt like we were estranged from certain members of his family. And I know that's not true for like all of my brothers and sisters because they knew my grandparents to a certain extent and stuff, but I was just my grandfather was dead by the time I was born, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother died when I was like 3 or so. So yeah, it was, I think that was something that just always really impressed me about their story. And I know for a fact that like the gospel has changed my dad. Like he has a really, really strong belief in the gospel and in repentance. And um, that's just so much a part of who he is. And I really love the way that he like taught me about it growing up, because for him it was like, you know, the church is like the institution that kind of has these things, but he was like, it's the gospel is what's true. And the gospel is where the focus needs to be. And I think that kind of approach to thinking about the gospel was really healthy for me and helped kind of form, I don't know, just how I stay like strong in the church and what keeps me engaged. And even when I'm having challenges or when I don't agree with certain positions or, whatever happens to be like that kind of core of like the gospel as being the thing that's true and that makes me a better person and that's made my parents better people. I think there's absolutely truth to that for sure.
Right.
I know it's not true for everybody in my family, right? Like
No,
my
everybody's
brother,
journey is different. But
everybody's journey is different,
yeah.
so it's but I think for me, and it's not just, I don't know, there have been lots of things that have kind of anchored my testimony in the gospel, and where I feel like this really has made me a better person in a lot of ways that I would not have been otherwise, and given me a lot of opportunities to serve and to grow that I would not have had in other churches in the same way. And I'm like hugely grateful for that. Like it's really shaped me into who I am. And I like who I am. So I think that's a good
Great.
thing.
So what I'd like to do is, I know we've got questions in the audience.
Okay.
And I know we're kind of getting close to time here, but I don't want to leave the opportunity off. I don't want to take it off the table for those who want to ask some questions for Monica. So what we're going to do is, if you're in the audience, you would like to ask a question, please just raise your hand. And I forget how to do that. I think there's a couple people on here who may know how to do that. But raise your hand. We'll call on you. Mac, option Y. Thank you, Steve. Perfect. Raise your hand. We'll call on you one at a time. We'll ask you to either turn on your mic or your camera and mic if you would like to choose, and come on and ask Monica some questions. So I know they're there. Let's start with this first one.
In the chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you see that? So the question is, have you been able to fully forgive your parents, your father, your mother, maybe even God?
Yes. So the short answer is yes. This is an interesting one for me because I think I don't really, when I was young, I had some kind of anger and resentment, but I tend not to be a very like resentful person. I don't really hold things against people, because I understand that it's usually coming from a place of like pain, right?
Yeah.
When people hurt other people, they're responding from a place of pain in themselves, and so I don't hold grudges. I think one of the things that was really important for me to learn about forgiveness, though, was that forgiveness does not have to entail continuing to make yourself vulnerable to someone who's dangerous or is going to
Yes.
hurt you. And I think sometimes a lot of people look at forgiveness and they're like, oh, well, if I've really forgiven them, like I'm not going to remember what they did. And I was like, I think there's like God doesn't remember, but I think there's a reason that we remember our mistakes and that we remember other people's mistakes. And you don't have to be like resentful or want harm or pain or anything else for anyone. When you're protecting yourself, right? Like you still should protect yourself. And so that's kind of like something I'm dealing with kind of right now, is kind of figuring out, well, do I want to be in a position where I know my mom is going to keep hurting me in these really like profound, hard ways? Or am I going to say, I want her to be happy. I hope the best for her, but I have to have a boundary here, so that I'm not vulnerable to that anymore. Like those types of questions. Anyway, I don't know if that makes sense, but that was really hard for me to learn, because I think for a long time I thought, oh, well, if I'm forgiving someone, then I'm giving them another chance, right? But forgiveness doesn't have to be kind of putting yourself at risk.
Yeah,
Right?
forgiveness can have boundaries that are safe. It's
Yeah.
like, I think forgiveness, like I've said before, it's like it's mainly for us to be able to let go and move on.
I think it's all for us.
Yeah, because it doesn't I guess it can benefit them if
It
they
can.
feel
Yeah.
sorrowful and stuff like that. But if they're not in a place where they are even caring, us being able to forgive lightens our load, and we're able to move forward and not have bitterness and
Yeah.
stuff. Because I thought, because there were some things with my childhood that were challenging and stuff. And once I realized that everyone involved in my life as a child gave their best, I don't think any of them were like, I'm just going to go ahead and just screw up Celeste's life. I'm just going to do it and see what happens. I'm going to have fun. Like none of them were like doing that, right? They were just living their lives with what they have, whatever their baggage is they were dealing with, and doing the best they could in the moment. And I think once I grasped onto that, I'm like, oh, okay, they all did their best. I don't think anyone intentionally was trying to hurt me. But I can glean the good things from them and use that, and then leave the baggage behind, leave the stuff I
Yeah.
don't want to have behind, and then just move forward and just love them for who they are and were and whatever, right? It doesn't benefit us to have that anger and pain and stuff with us.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. So, and I think it's really is, like you said, it can benefit people sometimes, right? If they're remorseful, but like, I think forgiveness is really about us, like internally. And I think something else that's important about forgiveness is that, which I kind of learned, I think, going through my divorce in particular, is that it's not dependent on the other person, right? Like
right.
you might want them to, like, I would love it if my mom could see the hurt that she's doing and apologize to me, but she's not going to, right? Like, and that's not in this life anyway, right? And so I think it's important to recognize that like forgiveness isn't dependent on anyone else's behavior either. That you don't, you can forgive someone and move on, and without them ever apologizing or taking responsibility or anything. Like, it's all about you and like where your heart is at. So.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions from the audience? It seems like we had a bunch, but I think, Monica, you are pretty thorough, so you might have done a good job answering some of them.
Okay.
Gone through. So
Good.
Yeah. Well, if we don't have any other hands popping up here, what I'll do is go ahead and wrap us up tonight and say, Monica, thank you.
Yeah,
it's not so bad once you get going, is it? Not so nerve-wracking.
Totally nerve-wracking. No, I'm kidding. It was,
Oh,
it
no,
was
no.
fine. It was good.
Like, it's like the first couple minutes, and then all of a sudden it's just like, oh, okay, there's a groove here, and we're just friends chatting, and it works, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
I
fine.
didn't even ask any hard questions.
I know. I know it.
She be proud of me.
We were hoping for Terry to like spill some good secrets and stuff. But we didn't get any.
I know.
All right. She'd be like, let me tell you what I know about Monica.
Absolutely.
It looks like we do have one other hand from
Oh.
Skip in the audience.
Skip.
Cool.
I don't think that's his real name.
I don't think so either.
Because he's
Yeah.
been saying that's not his real name.
I know somebody stole his real name, so super.
Yeah,
Skip.
I was wondering if Monica is taking applications for childbearing.
Oh my gosh, John, seriously.
I mean to mute you.
Well, no, I'm kidding. No. My son was for a while, though. There was a huge part of his childhood where he really wanted siblings, and he was setting me up with all sorts of people. Some of whom were married. Like, every guy we would meet on the street, he'd be like, how old are you? My mom's this old. She wants to have babies so they can be my siblings. I was like, thank you, child, for that.
So I'm assuming that since you're open to adoption and fostering, that you would be open to a spouse that has children. And that
Oh,
would
absolutely. Yeah, I love kids. Like,
Yeah.
to me, like, I've never met a child who I could not love. Like, I think children are, like, people in general, I think are just so easy to love a lot of the time. I don't know, but yeah, kids in particular, like, they're so easy to love. They're so fun, and it's fun to see all their differences and their different personalities. And anyway, I adore kids. So
That's great.
yeah.
got one more.
Monica. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, there's just another hand.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Reyes. Okay, come on in, buddy.
Hello, everybody. Good night. So I relate to your story quite a bit. Without going into too much detail, I have come to the realization that I am not longer defined by the decisions my parents have made, and I have been freed from the burden that thought brought to my mind as I was growing up and in my youth and when I was around my mission time. I have made some mistakes in my life that have been detrimental, and as well as have taught me a great deal of about myself. So my question to you is, aside from being able to forgive your parents, what have you done personally to not fall back into that pattern? I think you did mention it once before, but I think it would be beneficial for everybody to delve a little bit deeper into that aspect of not being defined by them, but trailing your own path.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there are a number of things that I've done. done lots of therapy. That's like the first one. I'm very pro therapy. And I actually just started like EMDR therapy, which at first I was a little bit skeptical about. And my therapist was like, you might be a little bit of an overthinker to do this type of therapy, but it's going well so far. So hopefully I'm not too much of an overthinker. But so in EMDR, like for those of you who don't know very much about it, so it's eye movement, desensitization, reprocessing. And so it's a way to like look at old memories and kind of shift the negative feelings that you have from those memories and kind of put positive like connotations to those memories. So for example, I might have a memory of my mom where I had a really strong feeling about it, like I did something bad, right? That would be kind of the negative feeling. The positive feeling would be something like I did the best I could in this situation, right? So it's a way to kind of train yourself to kind of let go of some of the negative emotions, especially that you might have about yourself in particular in those circumstances, and put positive. So I'm excited for that because I think that will be really great. But I've done a lot of therapy. I think one of the biggest things for me was learning to set boundaries. So like, and that's true of like anything. So whether it's being able to say to a date, like, hey, this isn't working, I gotta go home, like, or being able to kind of, break up with someone when the relationship wasn't healthy. Being able to leave my marriage was like that was a huge one for me, and it was something I agonized over for a couple of years, where I was just like, I know this is really broken, but I really wanted to try to do everything that I could to make it work, and I also just felt like making that decision would like break me, like that kind of setting that boundary for myself would be really, really hard. And but really I think that was a really key movement in moving towards healing, even from my childhood, just learning to set boundaries and not to accept blame for things that weren't my responsibility. My child just brought in cookies for me. That was very kind. I don't know why he's still up, but that's okay. And that's something I'm still working on. So there's been a lot of kind of changing my thinking to understand that, which is I mean, it sounds easier than it is because it's a long process, but being able to say like, okay, I have an intuition about this feeling right now, like trusting my own intuition, recognizing like I have an intuition about this situation that like this isn't good, this isn't healthy, something's off here, and being able to like learn to trust my intuition, which I think is also really hard when you grow up being gaslighted all the time, because you're basically told that your intuition is totally wrong all the time. So yeah, so those are some of the like several things that I'm like have been working on and doing, is like trusting my intuition, setting healthy boundaries, realizing that like, which I don't know how to make this sound because I don't want it to sound negative, but recognizing that like we don't owe other people anything, right? Like that I think sometimes we have a tendency to think that kindness is like making sure people are happy or feeling good, when like sometimes the kindest thing to do for someone is to kind of hold the mirror up and kind of express your experience so that they can learn and grow, and not to do that and like to do that in a kind way, but to say like, look, this is having this effect on me. And that's something that's really hard for me to do because I just got so used to just absorbing everybody's stuff all the time. And so I don't know, those are a few things that I think have helped. Is that helpful? I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Absolutely. I have a follow-up question, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So that's great. I think boundaries is important, and it's at times it's difficult to help people understand what our boundaries are. But it's extremely important to teach them what they are, and to help them understand how important it is to you or to us, for them to respect them.
Yeah.
And as soon as someone shows disrespect for them, then that's when, like you said, like you call the date off or what, we take that step. But so the follow-up question is, what are you, aside from the therapy that you've done,
Mm-hmm.
what is it that you're going to do with What is it that you're going to do differently with your own child?
Right.
So that he grows in an environment that is nothing like what you grew up, but yet help him understand that that's where his family comes from, and not criticize them for not having that opportunity with their own parents.
Yeah, that's a really good question too. I think for me, a lot of that comes back to like the transparency. So my son is 14. He's starting high school next year. And so it's been cool to see the ways in which the strategies that I've used with him, like how that's blossomed into kind of who he is now and who he is going into high school. But like for me, like a part of the transparency is also, telling him like, hey, like this is why Grammy acts the way she does, right? This is what's happening. Like this is what happened in this situation. Do you want to talk about it with me and kind of work through it and process what just happened in this family interaction? And then also saying like it's not, she's not malicious, right? He understands kind of the difference between like people's actions and kind of where their heart or mind is. So like when he looks at my mom, he's actually comfortable spending time with her because he feels like he has a really good handle on what her behaviors are like and not internalizing them, which was something that I really wanted for him. I wanted him to be able to understand that like he didn't have to internalize other people's bad behavior around him, and that but that he could still treat them kindly, right? And kind of have some insight into why they act the way that they do. And there are different ways to do that. I think obviously the age level matters. Like I wasn't sitting down with my 5-year-old and being like, let's talk about Grammy and all of her stuff, right? I think it's more subtle than that, of kind of like, yeah, sometimes people do things we don't understand and that can hurt us and that can be hard. I mean, and there were lots of opportunities to do that when he was growing up. So his dad remarried, his dad's divorced again, but his dad remarried when he was about 5, but didn't tell us at all. And didn't want to tell him until he came out for Christmas. So he emailed me, I think like a couple of weeks before his Christmas visit, and said, hey, we got married or I got married, and Hunter's going to be staying with us when he's out here. And so we had these email exchanges, and I was like, I really think you should prepare him for that, but he didn't want to. So he told him at baggage claim, right? And so what I did, I was like, okay, I'm not going to tell him because I don't want to like break that trust with his dad, but I feel like I need to prepare him a little bit for this change because I think it's going to be kind of different. And so I, all before, like the week before the trip, I would take my son aside and be like, hey, like your dad has a big surprise for you. I said you might have like complicated feelings about it, and that's okay, but I want to tell you like it's a really good thing. Like this is going to be something that's going to be a good thing. It will bless your life. It's going to be okay. It's going to be good. It's a big surprise. It's going to be fun. And so like, and it was, but kind of giving him like, this is going to like some context for what was going to happen. I feel like that was a lot of what I did when he was younger, was kind of saying like, okay, well, let's just have some context around some of these things so that he could be positive, but that there was also space for all of his feelings. So those were some of the things that I did. We recently had, when my brother died, we had a family memorial service that was really rough in a lot of ways, and there was a lot of crying and other things that happened afterwards. And I went to check on my son afterwards, and I think this was one of those moments where I was like, I feel like I've really prepared him in ways that I didn't even realize I was preparing him for this. But he was crying and I was crying. I was just apologizing to him. I was like, I'm so sorry that you had to experience this and see this. And he said, no, Mom. He's like, I think I needed to see it so that I could know how lucky I am. He was like, I just am so grateful that you're my mom. And it was really eye-opening to me, where, and even afterwards, where he had so much empathy and compassion for like where everybody in the room was kind of at when all of this stuff happened. But also it seemed like he could see it clearly for what it was,
Wow.
which was like pretty incredible, I think. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you for your questions there. I'm not sure
Sorry,
your
that was
first
long.
name Xavier. No, you're good.
my
Xavier,
my
but
name is My name is Javier.
Oh, Javier. Okay.
Javier.
Thank you for coming on, and we appreciate your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So it doesn't look like we have any other hands up. And so this is going to be kind of the part of the show where we wrap it up and say, Monica, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story with us.
My pleasure.
I am super excited. And you're going to have to keep us posted about your PhD and when you graduate and all that good stuff. So it sounds like you got some big things coming up.
Yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully you'll find a way to use it. You know, it's not going to be like, well, I'm just going to stick with my job, but now I've got a PhD. Like,
I know, right? I've got
Yeah.
to use my Sumerian language skills somewhere. I don't know.
right.
Yeah.
Go back to Iraq and be like, hey guys, I got a PhD now. So
Be
this
like,
is
do you have
my
any?
hobby.
Yeah, I have any clay tablets for me to read? Pass them
Right.
along.
That's awesome. Well, Monica, thank you so much. I appreciate
Yeah, you're welcome.
being on the show with us. And for everybody in the audience, thank you so much for attending tonight. This is the part of the show where we wrap it up and say, we appreciate you being here. We stop the recording.